Hey guys, in this video I'm going to break down a chord progression used by the band Dirty Loops in their song Next to You. Here's what it's going to sound like. The clip you heard was not played by me, but by the band's lead singer Jonah Nilsson, in a video put out by Korg. As you might know, Korg sponsored Jonah and they asked him to explain his style, so he put out two videos on their channel. And the bit you heard comes from the second video. Unfortunately, Jonah doesn't go into any details in these videos as to what he's playing in the progression or why. So I'm going to try and fill in the gap for you. You'll find the links to the original videos by Jonah in the description. This video is going to be divided into two parts. In the first, I'll go over the chords in the progression, first at normal tempo and then slowly. I've transcribed Jonah's playing, and you can find a PDF with the transcription and the chord names in the video description down below. In the second part of this video, I'll explain how I personally would have come up with this progression, or maybe an equivalent one, and sort of give you hopefully an idea of maybe the underlying concept if there is one. So basically we're going to do some reverse engineering in this video. Okay, so let me start by first playing out the progression, and of course don't forget to check out the full transcription in the link below. Now let me slow down and go over each of the chords. I'm not going to name them because sometimes the voicings are kind of, I guess, maybe don't make up very simple chord names. Instead, I'm just going to let you pause the video on each chord and look at what the sort of appears on the screen, and hopefully that will help you copy things along with the PDF. Okay, now that I've gone over the specific chords that make up the progression, I'd like to try and explain how, maybe myself or you might have come up with a similar chord progression. I think that's the really interesting question to ask rather than simply copying the chords. And in my opinion, the idea that underlies this, this particular progression is one of a focal point, and I'll explain what I mean by that. So I think it was Charles Mingus, who was an influential jazz bass player, who said that in jazz there are no wrong notes, only wrong resolutions. And this means that if you know where you're going, you can stray from the path as long as you end up where you promised your listener you'd go. And I'll give you a couple of examples of this. So for that, I'll switch to a different sound. I'll take a piano. So let me just scroll through the presets in my keyboard and also help my cat off me. Now, for example, one case of a focal point that sort of acts as an anchor for your progression is what's known as a pedal point. And a pedal point, let's say you're in the key of C, and you keep playing the C bass note in your left hand as you change chords in the right hand. Now I went through a bunch of chords, and I could have gone through a different set of chords. The sort of, even though I sometimes switch to, let's say, chords that would be maybe not directly intuitively related by regular quote-unquote harmony, they work well together. Because this pedal note gives the listener some sort of focal point, and he or she kind of know in the back of their mind, even if they can't articulate it, that this is sort of their safe haven. So you can start playing really crazy stuff in your right hand, and it would work much better than had you just played it without the pedal note. So by having this sort of anchor, you can really experiment with different voicings and do some crazy things that would sometimes work and sometimes not, but this could act as a very powerful glue. Now, the idea of a pedal point can also be extended to what I call an upper pedal point. So in this case, you're still, let's say, playing in the key of C, and you're still holding down or repeating a particular note, but now we're going to hold it down or repeat it not below the chords, but above the chords. And you know what? Let me switch to this electric piano sound. I think it's going to sound even more pleasing this way. And imagine just having this simple chord progression of, D minor, E minor, F, G, A minor, G, C, this sort of climbing chord progression. And it doesn't sound very exciting. If I play it like this, the chords jump all over the place and it's, they don't flow that well. Now, if I add an upper pedal note, which would be the C, the root of the scale, it would act as a glue, again, an anchor point that the listener can gravitate towards. So, for example, I could climb with my chords this would act as an anchor, just gluing all of the chords together, gluing all of the voicings together. And again, just like with the pedal note down below, this upper pedal note could let you or help you experiment, all sorts of different voicings that would probably not work otherwise. For example, let's try, the C major, F sharp major, E flat major, F. So I'm adding all of these, quote unquote weird chords in the middle that are outside the scale, and they mesh together because I'm giving the listener this anchor point. And in my opinion, this is really what makes the Dirty Loops progression in, at the end of their song Next to You work. Basically, and Jonah says this in his video, to his credit, that when he wrote down his progression, he had this next to you, this sort of anchor note in his head, and he built everything around it. So, even if he didn't call this a pedal point, he still sort of explained a similar thing. His original progression, which I played, was in the key of A. And he kept, next to you, this A note up here, fairly constant between the chord progression. If you go back and have a listen, you'll notice it. So for example, in the sort of third part of his chord progression, he had this succession of chords that only works because he keeps this A note up here. If I didn't play this with the upper pedal note, it doesn't really work out that well as when you do keep the pedal point. And only towards the end he breaks away from the pedal point. So this is something that I hope has given you some deeper insight into this weird succession of chords. And my advice to you is not to try and understand this chord progression in terms of the chords that it uses, but rather, because he uses some outlandish chords that are kind of difficult to figure out. Instead, you should try and make sense of it by noticing that he has an upper pedal note, which in his case is an A, and obviously everyone has their own way of thinking about chord progression, but in my own personal view, this progression worked, or the way he came up with this progression is he sort of went through all sorts of different chords and he tried them out, and just having this upper pedal note made a lot of his choices sort of mesh together much more easily. So it's almost like a cheat. You can use this and use pretty much any chord progression you'd like. That's it. I hope you've learned something interesting, and I'll see you next time.